Well, thank you for joining me on exercise 3G. I'm going to be looking at question 2, part B. Find the real and imaginary parts of the following complex number, and it is 1 on I plus 2I on 1 minus I. Okay, so let's take the first fraction, and we've got a 0 plus 1i, and on the second fraction we've got a 1 minus I. Now I'm going to treat these two fractions separately. Let's treat them separately, and let's take the first fraction and multiply it by its conjugate on the top and the bottom, the conjugate of the denominator, and take the second fraction and multiply it by its conjugate. Now the conjugate of 0 plus 1i is 0 minus I, and the conjugate of 1 minus I is 1 plus I. So that is how we will get rid of our imaginary components of the denominator. So let's see what happens here. Now we expand the top, and we've got just 0 minus I, so I'm just going to put a minus I. And the denominator, we've got a 0, we've got a 0, we've got a 0. So the first three terms is 0. And finally, we've got a positive 1i times negative 1i is a negative I squared. All right, let's look at the second fraction. 2i times 1 is 2i, and 2i times I is plus 2i squared. And the denominator, 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times I is I. Negative I times 1 is negative I. And negative I times I is negative I squared. So let's change these I squareds, because in complex number, I squared is negative 1. So we've got a negative I squared. So that's a negative 1 times negative 1. That's a positive 1. And we've got a 2i squared, which is 2 times negative 1, which is negative 2. So let's change. We'll leave that as negative I on the numerator. Make sure it doesn't look like a 1. Negative I squared underneath is a 1 from our first line here. And we'll leave the 2i. We'll change the 2i squared into negative 2. And we can cancel our denominator, and we're left with 1 plus, and negative I squared is 1. All right, so let's see what this looks like. So the first fraction now has become simply negative I. The second fraction is 2i minus 2 over 2. Well, that will simplify into 2i over 2 minus 2 over 2, and that becomes I. So negative I, that becomes I, and this becomes minus 1. Therefore, we finish with, that will cancel, we finish with negative 1. Well, that is the number. And negative 1, I will change that to plus 0i, because there is no imaginary component. So the real component of our z value is simply negative 1, and the imaginary component of our complex number is simply 0. So we look at the original fraction, and you can see it's hard to tell that the real component is -1 and the imaginary component is 0. However, once we've simplified it, I hope this has helped. Until next time, stay happy.